Justin Gaffrey with GaffreyArtMaterial.com, and today we're going to paint a lakescape painting. So I spend a lot of time outdoors in Northwest Florida. We have a really unique environment and I paint it a lot. And what's interesting is the way I paint now though, since I know the area really well, I kind of make up scenes and I do not paint them exactly as they are. And I just paint these depictions of what they're like. And it allows me to have a lot of freedom to paint. It's not like I have to paint from a photograph. And that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna paint a lakescape that I'm just gonna make up out of my mind that represents most of the lakes where we live here in Northwest Florida.
So we're gonna start today by putting a base coat on this wood panel. And we're gonna use this base coat that we make, which is a mixture of titanium white, phthalo blue, and a little bit of clay in there that gives it some nice, it kind of dulls it down and gives it a semi-gloss, and it works great as a foundation, but we also use it as a finish coat. And you can see here I'm kind of making an arbitrary line for the horizon, and we're going to fill the blue from there on upward, all around the sides and the top. And I'm going to get a nice coat on there, but I'm not worried about getting like 100% like where you can't see through it. I am going to get it covered. However, this is going to get covered with texture, so we're not really worried about getting, you know, a nice solid finish coat on there. So it's just a primer, just like you would gesso. And just get the good coverage in there. And we're using this 2-inch brush that we have, which is great for getting just these big coats on there of solid color. I use this brush a lot in painting as well, not just the foundations. So once we fill up the top here, we're going to skip this center part, which is actually below center, where I said the horizon is going to be. Somewhere in between this area right now where I'm painting, where you still see the wood panel, we're going to paint white on there, because the bottom is going to have water and some of the grasslands in there, but I'm not worried about the blue showing through. And so that's why we did this little separation. And so this next paint here, this is our number 5, and I love this paint. This paint is my new favorite paint. It's super thin, super high opacity, and it's got great coverage in the way it flows, and it has a little bit of extended dry time on it. And it has so many versatility uses, especially when you're blending in with the textures, but also creating these foundations. And the reason I'm using this as opposed to my base coat and the foundations will work fine too, because I want this transition area where the horizon is white to be super smooth, and I want it to blend really well with the texture. So the base coat in white would work too, but this number 5 is going to work perfect. And so you can see now at the base of the white is truly where our horizon is going to be. And there's going to be a transition point between the white and the blue up top, and that's where we'll transition the texture into. So we have our transparent yellow iron oxide, and I use this color a lot. This really warms things up. If you blend it with white, of course, it has opacity to it, but I'm going to create a little warmth in the horizon here, so it's just not a stark white. And you're welcome to do it any way you want, but this painting is definitely going to have warm tones in it, and so this brings this nice warm horizon in the background. And you can see there as it gets darker and darker to the bottom where the tree line is going to be. Now that I have the horizon roughed in, and again, this is kind of roughed in, this will all become cohesive later when we pull it all together. I'm going to jump back up into the sky, and I'm going to use our light phthalo blue texture for our sky. And I do this a lot of different ways, and I'm going to just show you this way I do it today. And I'm going to show you lots of different ways, but basically right now I'm just getting texture on the wood panel, because I can put it on my palette and just keep scooping it back in, but I got nice coverage on there, and now I'm just going to spread the knife and get it all smoothed over. And in the very beginning, I'm not going to worry about getting it perfect. Oh, and by the way, make sure your knife is really clean on the bottom, because little specks or little dried paints will create lines and grooves along the wood panel as you go. So again, as I'm saying, it's almost like at this point, like you're just getting the icing on the cake and just getting coverage. Don't worry about what it looks like. However, what's important at this time is to watch that white area and stop there, because we're going to transition the white and the blue together at the horizon. We're not going to, you know, you can kind of see that line right there, and we're going to use that white in there, and that's where we're going to like create this transition between the two with a palette knife. And this is the point where we start carving out the sky. And if you imagine this, the clouds are moving, and so I'm just practicing the movement, and I'm kind of creating this upward. When we go across the texture, I'm just barely hovering across, and I always practice my movement. It's almost like practicing a golf swing. Just keep practicing so you can get that flow going. So I'm gonna add some more titanium white, and this is kind of how we're gonna create the clouds, and getting a little bit of that warmth in there too, as I said, just to match and balance that white in the horizon. I'm just hovering over the top of that white, and so you get the nice transition between the two. And now we get this nice seamless transition between that flat part of the horizon and into the sky. And now I'm just gonna be basically doing some cloud work and mixing a little bit of the iron oxide in there, and I'm just hovering over the top. You gotta be really careful with the iron oxide too, that you don't make greens as you start mixing it. You can see I'm getting that stroke in, kind of just like hovering over the top. If I keep mixing it, luckily it's not a lot, but if I had more of a yellow, it would turn the sky green, and so you got to always be really careful with that. It's almost like the sky part is grabbing the white texture off of there. It's almost like a magnet. As long as you just hover over it, it'll pull it off for you. And so the good thing about clouds is they're kind of all organic shaped, and you just keep playing with it until it feels right. And clearly I messed this one up. It didn't feel right, so I'm just mixing it all back together. If I had a lot of yellow in there, I wouldn't be able to do that because my sky would be green. But it's okay because I don't mind that kind of warm sky look either. It's kind of nice, and it'll balance out the rest of the piece. So it's kind of an accident that kind of works out. And that's what's really good about working in this texture. As long as you catch it while you're working, it's really easy to fix as opposed to other styles of painting. So I'm gonna jump back in and try and get these clouds right again, and mix a little bit of that iron oxide and just letting those clouds just like be sucked off the palette knife there, and just trying to finish up this piece again. And so now I've got this nice transition between the blue and the kind of warm blue, and I'm okay with that. I kind of like it. It kind of makes that blue really pop out. I'm gonna start gathering all of my colors for building the landscape, the part of the bottom of the painting. This is the part where all the grasses and the trees. There's also going to be some water that's in the center of the piece, and you can see that from the the introduction of the video. And so right now I'm throwing in some of our Nori green, which is a green we made that I love. It's a really super deep warm green. And then we have our yellow ochre, which is going to give a nice glow against that dark green. And I use yellow ochre and trans oxide a lot, especially here in Northwest Florida. We have a lot of the sawgrass, and so it's lots of those ochre colors. And they change colors throughout the day, especially in the morning and evening, and kind of capture the color of the sun. And I really like that. And so I'm using the 2-inch brush, and I'm kind of flattening out the point, and I'm just creating this kind of distant tree line with the Nori and a little bit of the iron oxide mixed together. And I'm just brushing them in lightly. And so since they're really far away, they don't have to be perfect. This is an impression of a tree. I'm not really painting a perfect tree right there. And that nice darkness there is going to give it really good depth right there at the base there. So when you're looking far away, like it's going to look further away. And so then as I start coming forward, I start to lighten it up a little bit with the yellow iron oxide and the yellow ochre. And I'm just flipping the brush up and kind of creating those grasses. And I'm kind of filling in the area where the grasses are, and the area to the left is going to be water. And I'm just rough drafting this in right now because I'm going to balance the water and the land in there together. So popping in just variation between the Nori and the yellow ochre, and giving nice contrast between the grasses. And as the grasses, get closer, they get taller and taller. So I'm using our number 5 again to create our foundation for our water. And I'm going to start with the lightest at the background, like it's coming in from the horizon and that light is coming in. I'm using this nice big Filbert brush. And right now I'm just starting with just like a nice warm white, so it almost balances the horizon and doesn't transition too far into a deep blue. And the blue will come as it gets closer to us. And I'm just trying to show that depth into there. You can see here now I'm just brushing in the water, and I'm using a little bit of phthalo blue mixed with the ochres, and it makes this nice turquoisey color right there with the Nori. And each time I pull in, I pull a little bit of the ochres and the Noris from the side, so that water feels like it's reflecting off the side. Just the blending kind of takes a while here doing this, and not really working with much texture at this point. The texture will come in a minute, but I kind of only going to put texture in as you get closer to the front of the piece. This is just kind of how the clouds were landing right there. And so I'm going to put some of the titanium white texture on the palette, and this is what I'm going to use to create some texture in the water. And I'm going to mix some of the Viridian color with a little bit of all of my colors that I was using for the grasses. So right now I'm trying to match the color that I had on there, so when I bring the texture in there, it doesn't look foreign to it. I'm just going to hover right over the top, just so it barely grabs it. Like I said, like it just magnetically grabs it, because I don't want to get it fully textured. I just want it to be like light is capturing the top of it. And I kind of got a little heavy with there, so I'm going to have to like re-blend it in, but that's just the way it goes when you work with this. It doesn't work out perfect each time, but that's okay. And my strokes are going to get lighter and lighter as I go back towards the horizon, because the ripples on the water are going to be smaller. So basically what I'm doing right now is I just keep coming back and transitioning the color of the sawgrass into the water, so it keeps that natural balance. So I'm using raw umber now, and this is one of my favorite colors I use in my, lakescape, landscape paintings. It's just a nice deep brown. It's the perfect brown, honestly, for me. However, I don't have my little tiny brush right now to make these strokes in the back, so I honestly just use whatever tools I have sometimes, and I don't always do it, but I'm using a razor blade, and I'm just like getting little points of paint on there and just tapping on there. And the trees where I live, they're planted longleaf pines, which are actually loblolly pines, and they were designed to grow really tall without branches for the paper mill and lumber. And so it's really easy to paint those with a razor blade because they're really tall. And all of our lakes, they have these distant horizons, as you can see, with these tall trees, and it's really iconic in our area, and I love those trees. Even though they're planted, they've become our natural environment, so they look really nice. So whatever paint I have left on my palette here, it really doesn't matter what color it is, because all these colors are balanced anyway. I'm going to just mix it all together and add some more titanium white, and this is what we're going to use to build out the larger trees. And actually, if any of this color shows through, it shows a nice dynamic contrast for the trees. And this is where we actually use a pastry bag to make the larger trees as they get bigger as you come into the foreground. And so I'm going to take this bag, which is a 21-inch plastic pastry bag, and I'm going to put a little bit of that transparent iron oxide in there. And I'm also going to put some raw umber in there. And what this is going to do, it's going to coat the paint as it slides out, and it's going to build the trees. And so I'm going to basically mix those two together because everything is going to balance. And it's kind of covering the whole bag in there, and I'm going to scoop all that paint in there. And if you ever worked with a pastry bag doing pastries before, you got to make sure you get it in there really tight and twist it. So I'm going to add a little bit more white behind it. And I'm going to like this because it's going to have different color contrasts coming as you go. And so make sure it's really tight and cut off a really small tip. It's better to go smaller than larger because you can always cut it bigger, but you can't make the hole smaller. And so you can see here, I'm practicing on the palette, and it's always good to practice your movements with the palette knife or the bag or anything before you actually put it on the wood panel itself. So I'm just gonna start throwing trees in there in a very loose way. And what's good about this bag here is you can see it's kind of two-toned, and you can see one side is coming out more iron oxide and one side is coming out more umber. And you can direct that to the light if you want. If you want the light coming like on here from the left, the left side of the tree will glow a little more. And you can do that if you're painting by hand, but it's kind of hard to do over the texture. And this is a good way to paint over texture, especially wet on wet. And a lot of times you can see there I like to paint it over the sides. But definitely practice this coming out of the bag, and make sure that bag stays really tight while you're pulling, because it'll come out the top or it'll get air bubbles in it and it'll mess up. And so you want to get this right the first time, because once it gets onto the sky, yes, you can scoop it off, but it gets a little messy. And so this is our Chartreuse green, a color that I developed, And I use this a lot in my landscape paintings. It's just a really nice green. It's very earthy, and it blends well with lots of other greens and browns and yellows. And so you could turn this green into so many other different greens. And I just love the texture of that. Look how that just holds up on its own. Again, my favorite color, the transparent yellow iron oxide. A lot of names to say, and the Nori. And you can see here, I keep pulling the same colors so the painting has cohesion to it, and it's not a bunch of different colors. Sometimes, I forget and I'm not paying attention, and I'll throw the wrong color on there, and it just throws off the whole balance. But I kind of look at colors like spices. After you cook a while, you just get to know them, and it just comes automatic on what to add. You don't really have to think about it anymore. And I'm just tapping the paint off. You can see there, I'm using the side of the knife and just tapping it. And then, like I said before, the wood panel becomes like a magnet and just sucks it off of there. And these are not traditional techniques to work a palette knife, but they're the ones that I developed in a way that makes sense for me. And it's a perfect way to get a nice treetop there. And I'm always using the bottom of the knife, and you can see there I'm showing you the bottom. And you can have the knife upside down when you're tapping it. It depends on what you want. So now I'm just going to start filling in and tighten up around the entire piece and bringing in cohesion to the whole thing, whether if it's in the water or it's in the sawgrass or wherever it needs to be. So right now I'm just trying to get a little bit of the watercolor mixed in again. Not watercolor per se, like type of paint, but I'm trying to get that balance. A few areas just didn't look natural to me, and I want to make sure that it flows really good. So basically right now I'm just working on highlights, and I'm working on areas to just make sure there's cohesion in the entire painting. And right there with that yellow ochre, I like just popping in some little bit of bright areas and getting that grass to pop out and glow a little bit. There's also a few other areas. I think that basically I wanted the sky to reflect a little bit more blue into the piece, and so I'm just doing a very light blue wash. I felt that the water was a little too green, and this is real washy, so that green actually glows through under it. I just felt it was a little bit too green, and I actually like the green. It's just this is what I felt in that moment, so it's not imperative that you switch it that way. But this is how it goes, when I'm painting. I'm just kind of move through it and kind of let it take its course. And it's not a big deal because I'm still leaving a lot of that green show through as well. And this is a pretty quick process to do that, and very forgiving and easy. By the way, the painting underneath is dried enough too where I can wipe it off, so it's not gonna be too detrimental if I mess it up a little bit. I can wipe the blue off. So I'm just kind of finish it off with a little bit of lily pads and lily flowers, which are all over our dune lakes here. And they always bring lots of little pops of color. Sometimes you just need that little bit of color or that little bit of texture, and so we'll pop in these little lily flowers right out of the bag. It makes it really easy. And I'm going for an impressionistic look, so I'm not trying to be perfect here. I'm going to pop a little bit of magenta in there, and this is just going to just glow on there. Sometimes I put a little yellow and magenta. I think I'm just going to do magenta and just hit little pops on there, and then as it gets further away they get smaller and gives it just a little bit of brightness to the whole painting and gives it a little bit of color. And it's not necessary to do it, but a lot of times I just always like to have a little pop of color, because in our landscapes here, that's kind of how it is. You won't see a flower until you look really close. But that's basically it, and there's a lakescape from Northwest Florida.
So thanks everyone for painting along with me. I'm sure everybody's painting came out just perfect. I just want to talk about a few things to close out here. Talk about dry times. Everybody asks how long they take to dry. This painting here is still really soft. It's dry to touch, but I've had a fan on it for about 24 hours. And so you want to keep a fan blowing on there. If you don't have one, it's fine. It lay horizontal, but it's just going to take much longer to dry. But in 24 hours, you're going to have a nice dry to touch piece on this painting here. I created Gaffrey art material because I wanted to share this paint with everybody. And I want to teach everybody how to paint it. So if you like and subscribe and let me know what you want to learn how to paint and what you want to do, I'm going to be here to help you learn how to work with this texture paint. So go to gaffreyartmaterial.com and we'll see you next painting.